This is an overview of the HCL Launch product. HCL Launch is an enterprise-grade continuous delivery solution. It uses a server agent model to map and deploy applications which can be made up of one or many components. And these components are drawn from continuous integration servers, they're pulled from artifact repositories, and there's many ways that you can configure these components so that we actually can pull those artifacts and files in to then be deployed. So at the highest level of the HCL Launch product, we have the application. And the application is generally made up of multiple components, which are then mapped to environments that we want to deploy these components to. And for each of these applications, we define a process for how this application gets deployed. In this case, I have this here, which is my standard deployment process for my JKE banking application. And what we do is we install the web server, we install the database component, and then we install the database schema and then the Java file. And within each of these steps is actually the component process, which is the scripts and the steps that the agent is going to run on that target machine depending on which environment we deploy this application to. So jumping back here, I can see there's 5 environments for my JKE banking application. If I click the drop downs, I can see this application is made up of 4 components. Here's my web server, here's my database server, here's my Java file, and here's my schema component. And you can also see which versions of these components are deployed in each environment. I can see when they were deployed, I can see if they were deployed successfully, and I can click and see any other information about those deployment requests and the logs as well. So all of this information makes it very easy to keep track of auditing, to do governance, to handle the approvals and things like that make it very good for enterprise environments. Another thing that can be mentioned is for each of my components and each of my applications and even my resources and environments, I'm able to templatize these processes. So if I were to go out here, I could say create an application from a template, and in this way it makes it easy to onboard many applications that might be similar from a common template. And similarly, we can do that for components as well. If I have many Java components that might follow similar processes and I want to share that deployment process, we can create a template for that to make it easy to do so. So let's walk through what it might look like to run a deployment. I'm going to deploy a new version to my dev environment of JKE Banking. So I can click Request Process. And it's going to tell me deploying my JKE Banking application to my dev environment. I can select which process I want to run. I'm going to run deploy. When I click Next, it gives me the option of which versions I want to actually run in this deployment. So I can specify specific versions of each of my components, or in this case, I'm going to do a snapshot. And now a snapshot version is actually just a grouping of my component versions. And what's very special about snapshots is it makes it easy to deploy things that have been deployed together, that have been running together, that have been testing together, onward to further environments. So it makes it nice when you put a status on a snapshot, you know that these versions of each of these components were tested and they can move forward together to make sure you don't run into things like dependency issues or mismatched versions. So you can also schedule these deployments. I could do it now or later or tomorrow. There's a backend API that's very open and documented that if you wanted to start deployments from a script or from a continuous integration server, it's very easy to do that. In this case, I'm just going to run this deployment now and we can see the process happening. So this is my application process request for the JKE Banking app. And you can see here, these are the 4 steps of my application process that are actually running. So the one I showed earlier that had the steps to install the web server and database are there, and nothing happened because my inventory is telling me that those versions were already installed. But the Java file actually changed as part of this snapshot So that was just installed. So the one component process that ran was the JKE War installation. And you can see here is a breakdown of the steps. You can see how long each step took. You can see when it ran, and you can click on the little blue box here to see the logs of everything that ran on that target machine. If you had any errors, you could find out what went wrong in here. In this case, it looks like everything was successful, so I'm not going to find any of that. So let's drill into what this component process actually looked like. To deploy my JKE War, I have this component process flow. I'm downloading the artifacts from the version. I'm going to extract those. I'm going to do some configuration changes, start and stop the server, and if I run any tests or anything, or if I want to add some sort of status to that version so that I know it's been deployed with some property value, I can do that here as well. And now these component processes are very easy to customize. I can go on the left side here and I can drag and drop different steps from our plugin framework. And from here, you just drag some arrows. You can change what happens on a failure case. You can set it to this gray circle here, which means move on no matter what, pass or fail, all sorts of things like that. And it makes it very easy to set up these workflows and do whatever logic you need as part of your deployment process. And again, these processes are able to be templatized, which means that we could, any sort of component that might be similar to another component, we can define a common process and we can onboard those. We can follow the same stuff, just inject some property values, and we're good to go, which is very good for scalability and onboarding of the tool itself. Now, within my application history, I can see all the versions that were deployed, when they were deployed, who deployed them, and I can click on the request and look back through history to see if anything changed, what went wrong, and all that sort of thing. And in this case, I have over here on my open tab, I can see that this version that I just deployed, it was actually out here running 10.9.8.1. One last thing is the settings and the configuration of the actual HCL launch server. So here we can define the different roles that we have. We can integrate with LDAP or Active Directory. We can pull in your different users, your different groups, assign their roles, determine things like who can do the approvals, who can kick off the deployments, who can view the deployment history. We can see all sorts of audit logs, output logs, and of course we can define things like the statuses, what versions are allowed to go to what environments, what types of statuses we want to be able to apply. And also within the settings is where we set up our plugins. And the plugins are one of the key capabilities of how the HCL launch tool works. And we integrate with hundreds of plugins today for both automation as well as source configuration. And the difference being automation plugins are what gives you access to those steps that we see within our component processes. So things that make it easy to interact with different types of app servers, with load balancers, with testing solutions. All you do is drop the plugin in, add some property values, and it should make it very simple and easy to integrate with. The source configuration plugins, on the other hand, are how our components actually draw their versions. So if we have a source configuration plugin for Artifactory or for Git or for ClearCase, you would set that component to directly pull those versions from those different artifact servers and repositories, and that's how we would know that you have new versions available to be deployed.